had it wired and plumbed in the attic. And when I found out about it, I evicted them. My concern was, should I call law enforcement, or as I did, I cleaned up the mess and threw it in the trash and found a new renter. Would there have been a possibility of my having my home or little rent house confiscated or held, or even claimed and had to go through a legal process to try to get it back? Or how would that have handled it?
He's saying his renter had a little marijuana garden going in there.
Right. And I had a few others come around after it's over and said, I think I'd have done just like you did, throw it in the trash and find a new rent. So I think, you know, we're all eager to get all the drug money you can and all the criminal element. But for those of us who, particularly like a renter, what kind of risk are we in?
Sir, you would be surprised how stringent the guidelines are that my DA uses to confiscate anybody's assets. And let me say this, we have taken rental property that people are dealing and cooking drugs in, and went in and busted the meth lab, busted the drug traffickers. It was rental property, and never one time have we ever even began to file any asset forfeiture against the person renting that property, not one time. If we would, the DA wouldn't take it, because let me say this, and I'll tell you why I know he wouldn't take it. We had a boy in Canadian County that was dealing drugs out of a house his mother gave him, and he was living in the house. His mother gave it to him, and he was cooking meth. He was selling it out of there. He was trafficking it out of there. And when the drug task force busted him, it was his house. We took it and we were going to put it in asset forfeiture. The DA said the intent of the mother, when she gave him that house, was for him to live in it, not deal drugs. It was still in the mother's name, and she had never signed the deed over, and the DA didn't file the asset forfeiture, although the boy had, it was his house. He said it was his house. The mother said, yes, I gave it to him. But morally, if we would have took it, we would have been taking assets from the mother, and we wouldn't have been right. Legally, it was still in the mother's name. So legally, we could have taken it anyway. The DA said no, we're not even going to entertain the idea of taking it. And I wholeheartedly agreed with it. And that's just this first step in the asset forfeiture process that we go through. That's when we take the asset forfeiture to the DA's office, and we go over all of it and talk about it. The DA, he's either on board or he's not on board.
Can we have another question?
Sure.
From our esteemed state representative. It's not the first time I've ever seen a man have a wrestling match with a potato chip bag. It's the first time I've seen a potato chip bag win.
My name's Bobby. I got a question for you, Sheriff. Would you be opposed to, if the funds went to, you had one person in the state that was in charge to look at the funds before they were distributed to see if they were drugs or not drugs, and it went into one pot? Would you be opposed to that? What I'm talking about is if it's, when you forfeit the money and someone says, hey, that's my money, you shouldn't take it, that they could go before one person and one person could make the decision whether it's their money or not. Would you be opposed to that?
Sure, I'd be opposed to it, because it needs to go through the due process. It needs to go through the court. It needs to be forfeited by a judge, and it needs to be forfeited to the agency that actually took the funds and prosecuted the criminal.
Okay.
I don't know of any other way.
All right, here's the problem. The guy that you got the money from he wasn't in drugs, but you took his money because you suspected it was drugs. It's gonna cost him money to get that money, his own money back.
Right.
That's my question. Why would we not just set it up where one person could make a decision on that? If the guy's in drugs, he's not gonna go up and challenge it anyway. But the guy that's, you took his money, and it wasn't right, he wasn't on drugs, but you just confiscated his money or his house.
You're talking about an arbitrator.
Basically, one person. Would you be opposed to it?
Sure I would, and Mr. Representative, the reason I would be is for the same reason that, Senator Lovelace is saying that the asset forfeiture, bill is bad. He's saying that there's no due process. Well, there is due process, whether he realizes it or not. Same due process as in any criminal case. We've got to have due process. I'm not comfortable for any one person to make a decision whether or not that person was or wasn't guilty of illegal criminal activity. By the time it gets to that point, if the DA if the DA says that there's a sufficient amount of probable cause to take it to court, and the jury finds him guilty, and or the judge signs off on the forfeiture, that's due process. I wouldn't ever be comfortable with one person having the power enough to say, yes, you can have your money back, or no, you can't have your money back. That's just too much power for one person to have.
Okay, one more question, please.
I'm Donna Fogg, and I live in the Edmond neighborhood, in the Copperfield neighborhood. I live right next door to the leased house that was the biggest drug bust in Edmond. That home is back into the hands of the property owners. They do have a lot of work to do in that house, but it was not confiscated because they are not involved with the drug.
Question.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying.
Yes, ma'am, I agree with that. Yes, ma'am, I agree with that, and nor should it have been confiscated. These drug runners, in human trafficking, pimps, I mean, they're pretty smart in terms of protecting their assets nowadays. They do it out of rental property, they do it out of rented cars now, and we never take the rented cars. Not one time have we ever taken a rented car from anybody. It goes back to Hertz or Allied or whoever's the rental agency is, and that's their purpose for renting homes and renting cars. They're protecting their assets.
One more question from Bobby.
Sheriff, I support you in getting the drug money. What I don't support is a person who's perfectly innocent having to pay money to get his own money back. That's what we've got to find a
Question, please.
find a way to do. So what do you think about that?
Good call, buddy. Good save.
My first reaction is by the time it gets through the different levels of critique done by law enforcement and the DA's office, and it gets to the point that it goes to court, the person's not just black and white, innocent or guilty. It's got to be decided by a court or in a court of law. That I can tell you this, and within my own agency it's happened, that we have taken, I can't remember the amount of the cash, it was like 23,000, something like that, from an individual that had a history of drugs, had they didn't have any possession of drugs on them at the time. They had a history, and they couldn't account for the money. The money was taken by law enforcement, given to the DA's office for them to make the determination, because in spite of what the senator says, we don't make that out on the road. We're not the judge and jury out on the road. And our DA, Paul Hess, ADA Paul Hess, said, you know, there's no direct proof this individual derived these funds from drugs. Yes, they have a drug history, but there's no direct proof, and they give the money back. That's the beauty of and it didn't cost the individual anything. It just, if the deputy doesn't know, and there's no way for the deputy to know, they have to make a reasonable assessment based on the physical evidence and both of the person and the vehicle. Then the DA looks at to make sure there's no question that whether or not that they could be innocent, and if so, they deferred on the side of the person and gives the money back. So there's checks and balances.
We appreciate your time and Under Sheriff coming to our meeting. Thank you for sharing your time. We're over time now. We have some more questions, so I invite you, can you guys stay for a couple of minutes? Sure. Okay, if you had questions that weren't asked, please see these guys after the meeting. Welcome to do it. And we thank you very much for being at High Noon today.
All right. I want to thank y'all for allowing me to be here. I love this country. I love y'all.
Thank you. Good afternoon.